My name is Bob Selman, and I am a professor of education and of psychiatry at Harvard University. And I've been here for over 40 years. I began my career at Harvard Medical School. I was trained as a clinical psychologist, and I directed a school. I actually directed a school for social and emotionally disturbed kids. After 15 years of that kind of work, I became very interested in what causes these kids to end up the way they were when we finally got to see them. Because if you looked at them, they didn't have a lot of biological problems. So most of it was environmental. So I became interested in prevention. And now we're just looking at everybody and trying to figure out ways to promote social development for all kids. I've been puzzled by a similar question to the one that Random Acts of Kindness has, which is, it kind of goes, if it's so important to promote social development, why aren't we doing it? There are a couple of new forces emerging recently that really make this issue much more salient. Social emotional development or social development feels more urgent for three reasons that are new. One is that the federal government has started to put funds into safe and secure schools, and states are trying to figure out how to use those funds. The second reason is that teachers are now facing the effects of being evaluated in their classrooms. And the evaluations are not limited to academic instructional time, but also to classroom climate and how teachers promote social relationships, positive social relationships in schools. And the third is a general cultural issue, which is that social media, social networking is putting kids in interaction with each other 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. And some of those interactions are clearly not going well. There's a lot of teasing and harassment and bullying on the web, and that's just caught everybody's attention. So the digital era is really also having an impact. So often when folks start to talk about the kind of competencies and skills we're talking about today, they're not sure what to call them. So they call them something like non-cognitive skills. And I think that sets a tone which says that they're not essential, because I think everyone has kind of bought in, not everyone, but a lot of people have bought into the idea that school is simply about academic achievement. It never has been, it isn't now, and it never will be. But we need to bring back an interest in what I call social development. Other people call them soft skills, because somehow I guess they think physics is hard and social relationships are easy, but I would tend to disagree with them. I think social relationships are among the hardest things we have to learn how to do well. I think one can make a distinction between two kinds of school-based social development categories. One is what I want to call pro-social behavior, and the other I'll call social understanding. And I won't give formal definitions, but I'll try to exemplify them. So pro-social behavior is being nice to people, having good discussions, following reasonable rules, just those kind of things that almost everybody would agree are indicators of respect and decency. And those we can find largely in the climate of the schools, on the playgrounds, in the classrooms. Those are not often taught directly. That's a big leap. But the other kind of skills that we're talking about are social understanding skills. And those are really social cognitive skills. Those are the kind of understandings and awareness that traditionally are part of the content of curriculum. So I think if we think about those two categories and try to understand how they relate to each other, we can make a lot of progress. For a number of years, I and many other people around the country have been trying to develop approaches that can actually integrate these kind of skills right into the classroom. Let me try to tell you a little bit about what I mean by an integrative approach, one that really integrates the social and the academic in a kind of beautiful weave. And the way I'm going to do that is to use the example of two children's books, two trade books that I like very much, and try to show how they can be used to promote both social understanding and academic content knowledge. The first book I want to talk about is a book called Freedom Summer. It's a picture book that's written for kids 2nd to 5th grade. And it tells a story about a time in American history when desegregation in the South was just starting. And the story is told through the eyes of two boys, one black and one white, who are friends. They're friends because the black boy's mother works for the white boy back at that time. And the story is basically about what happens to these boys when they run down to the municipal pool, when they've heard this news about everyone's going to be allowed to swim in the same pool at the same time, to when they find out that the pool has been tarred over, which is an actually historically accurate account of what happened in the South in those days. And what happens at the end of the story is when Joe offers John Henry, as is usual, to buy an ice pop for him, John Henry says, "No, I'd rather buy my own." So let me give some examples from our research of the kind of questions we asked to try to understand what children's social understanding is at different ages, kids from different backgrounds, different social class, and so forth. Okay, let's take the first part of the story. When the boys arrive at the municipal pool and are just bewildered by what they see. And we'll ask students in classrooms, grades 1st grade to 5th grade, why do you think the pool was tarred over? And some kids say, well, maybe they needed a parking lot, you know? Other kids will say something like, well, black kids and white kids don't like each other and don't want to swim together. And maybe some kids will say, well, obviously the community did not want to integrate, okay? So those are 3 different registers, 3 different levels of social awareness that are being exemplified. But if you don't ask the kids those questions, they won't give you answers. And it's important for us to feel comfortable with all 3 answers, because in some strange way, all 3 answers are correct. Actually, the pool probably was tarred over to be a parking lot, but that wasn't the essential reason why. And so I'm saying that if we learn how to ask kids these really difficult questions and allow them to share with us their theories, we'll both be promoting social awareness and deeper comprehension. Now, let me tell you what kind of questions we would ask when they arrive at the store. And the context of the store is different than the swimming pool, because now it's a friendship issue. Before it's a societal justice issue. And when Joe asked John Henry, what kind of pop do you want me to buy for you? And he says, I'll buy one myself. This requires students in the class to develop and demonstrate their capacity to coordinate points of view. A simple response, not unusual for younger kids, would be maybe Joe doesn't know what kind of popsicle John Henry wants, you know? Well, that might be true. But a more socially aware response, one that requires greater social understanding, would be something like, John Henry wants to demonstrate that he has the right to go into that store now too. And we want kids to be able to develop those concepts, and because they're both social and they're demonstrations of deep comprehension, which is very, very important these days. Let me tell you about another children's literature book that demonstrates another way to integrate social development into academics. And this one starts us moving from social understanding to pro-social behavior. The name of this book is The Name Jar. It's a story about a young Korean girl who immigrates to the United States, and her name is spelled U-N-H-E-I and actually pronounced Un-Hei. But she is embarrassed when other kids tease her about her name or do not spell it correctly. And so she is trying to struggle with the decision of whether to change her name. If a teacher were to take that story and ask the class, is it right to tease Un-Hei about her name? almost all the kids would say no, okay? Because they know what the right thing is to do. But if you were to actually observe what's going on in the class, you would find kids teasing her. And the question there is why, okay? And the second question there is, why is there a gap between what people know is right and what they do? That is a question which is for all of us to ponder. But it wouldn't harm us to start early. Now, it might be the case from a psychologist's perspective that the kids in the class will tease her because they are uncomfortable. And they are not going to know they're uncomfortable until it actually happens. And so there is a teachable moment there. And the teachable moment is to have the kids understand why they might know something is the right thing to do and yet still not do it. And one of the important methods that teachers can use there is not to preach this issue, but to have kids discuss among themselves why it is, what is right and why is it that we don't always do what's right. I mentioned how puzzling it seems to be that as much as we know that social development is an important part of the whole child and important to be an important part of schools, the question is, why hasn't it seemed to really found a home there in an integrative way? And I think one can reflect on three possibilities. The first barrier that I see is in teacher education and professional development. I've seen many teachers who learn how to promote social development through experience, but it doesn't come naturally to any of us. So you either learn it through lots of experience, through targeted educational programs and teacher training, or through continuing education. But it can't be just assumed to be known. It is really, really very difficult to only have this kind of an approach, this integrative kind of an approach in one classroom. Because if only one teacher is doing it in that classroom, it's gonna make that classroom different from all the other classrooms in that grade. And in fact, social development is developmental. So it really has to be embraced K to 8 through the whole school. The third barrier is that these kind of integrative programs are still not yet fully supported at the district level. And while I do think there's been a real improvement in accountability in schools and a real focus on instructional competence, I think that not until districts value social competence, kindness, sharing as much as they value physics, it's going to have a hard time finding a home. One is classroom climate. You cannot have a good instructional classroom without it being a safe classroom, and in fact, without it being a kind classroom. Second is content, academic content. It is still the case that most curricula are going to choose ecosystems over empathy when they pick a content area to teach. But those can be integrated by a creative curriculum and good instruction. The third skill that I think is most important, and we really haven't talked about much, and that is it's absolutely crucial to have a classroom climate that's safe and a content that's engaging in order to promote discussion among the kids in the classroom. And now I'm not talking about discussion as asking kids for a response and then evaluating it. I'm talking about a discussion where kids are exchanging ideas with each other. And that brings into play a whole second level of social development, which is kids respecting each other, listening to each other, and changing their learning from each other. And I think that's where we have to go. There's some very interesting research that has been around for a while to show that in most classrooms, discussion makes up maybe 3 to 5% of the learning block. And we have to ask why. Why is that? And there are many reasons for that, and they're all legitimate. It is very hard to have a good discussion if you don't have a safe classroom. It's very hard to have a good discussion if you don't have a clear focus on the content you want the kids to talk about. Here's another way to sum all of this up in a way. A lot of my colleagues on the faculty here have good hearts and are trying to improve schools, and they focus on the governance structure. They figure if we can develop an aligned governance structure between the district, the superintendent, and the teachers, we will improve education. But really, what needs to be done is to have a cultural alignment between teachers and schools and the districts. If you don't have a district culture that really values what the teachers value, they're going to be in a disalignment. And I think right now in this country, teachers intuitively know the kind of things we've talked about today and the kind of things that are in this online course are absolutely crucial, but they have less and less autonomy to be able to implement things that they really know are very close to the heart of education. If we think about the culture of education and what are the important ingredients in school reform that are going to make all of the things we've talked about today happen, I think they can be reduced to two ideas. One is we need good evidence that what we are doing is working, and we're not going to improve education without that good evidence. And secondly, we need good relationships. We need to have good relationships among kids, teachers and students, and schools and communities. And in essence, what social development and social emotional learning are trying to help kids develop to bring forth into their adulthood is the capacity to have good relationships. And I think those two competencies are going to matter a great deal in future educational reform.